Welcome back to B2B Revenue Leaders. I'm your host, Dustin Tizik. Today, I'm joined by Collin Mitchell. Collin is the Chief Evangelist at Humantic AI. And on this episode, we discuss why sellers need to sell to the person and not just to the persona. So elite sellers naturally do this. They adapt to the buyer's personality. It's maybe a natural skill, maybe something they learn, but hard to do at scale. With the rise of AI, though, now, there's finally interesting ways to really do this at scale. So Collin and I dive deep into that on this episode. Hey, Collin, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, man. Really looking forward to it. Enjoyed some of the content you've been putting out recently. So glad to be on here and talk about a topic that I think we're both pretty passionate about.
For sure. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to the conversation here. I want to dive right into, before we were talking, about selling to the person, not the persona. That's super interesting to me. Coming from a marketing background as well, we like personas. It's kind of in our DNA. So do you want to unpack that a bit for our listeners? Like, what do you mean there and how can they do that?
Yeah. So a lot of, and I think sellers have sort of adopted a very similar mentality to marketers, right? Where, who they target, how they target those people, the messaging that they use, they frame that all up based on the persona, right? So the particular, persona that they want to do business with. And the thing is that just doesn't work anymore. And the reason it doesn't work anymore is because it's what everybody is doing. And so when there's, executives are getting all of this outreach, people, trying to get their attention, you can't stand out to your buyers because you're not only fighting for their attention from you and your competitors, but for other products and services that aren't even competitive to you at all. They're all trying to get the attention. So the way that you can stand out is to customize your approach and personalize in a way that's unique to that person. And I don't just mean their job title, or where they're located, where they went to school. Maybe you found something on their feeds about their favorite sports team or something in a video or learned something about it in a podcast. Nothing wrong with that stuff. Some of that can be useful to say, hey, I actually really did my research about you, Dustin, before I reached out here. And so that you at least know that I don't just have you in some sequence and, in a very automated, non-personal way. But actually, I'm talking about their personality. I'm talking about, what does this specific person care about most? Are they a person that cares more about ROI? Are they a person that more cares about stories? Do they want to know that I've helped somebody just like them before? Or are they, somebody who really is just focused on facts and results, right? So we can actually reach out to these people and communicate in a way that's going to resonate most with them. The challenge is most sellers are going to always default to the way that they would buy, right? So I'm going to show up as a seller and communicate and talk about the things that I would care about if I was on the other side of the seat. And that'll work sometimes when you're reaching out to people that have similar personality traits to you, but it's not effective when you're reaching out to people that aren't necessarily the same type of personality as you or don't have the same communication preferences or things that really matter to them.
Yeah, so I definitely want to dive into how you get that info and arm yourself to be able to do that. Before we do, I just want to highlight that, it does seem like a quality over quantity play. And I think for a long time, marketing and sales, it was a quantity. Are you hitting your activity metrics? Are you sending enough emails, making enough calls? So this seems like dialing that back a bit and, really focusing on quality rather than the spray and pray, hope something lands.
Yeah. I mean, I've talked to hundreds of sellers. Most of the elite sellers and sales organizations, they understand that spending more time with the right people is a much bigger ROI than this sort of spray and pray approach, right? 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you could get away with a lot of that stuff, Yeah. If you said something interesting in the first line, that was good enough to get them to read your email. But I talk to sales teams all of the time. I mean, a matter of fact, I just talked to one shortly, a little bit today, a little bit ago, and, they're seeing low single digit positive reply rates.
Hmm.
I mean, it's getting really hard. And, standing out in the inbox or in the DMs or however you're reaching out, even if you're using the phone, I mean, this stuff works everywhere. Whatever channel you choose, you're going to increase your rates. We've tested it. We've, seen good results from the, companies that are, that we've done work with. And so really, and it doesn't mean that you can't automate it. Like, there's still ways to say, okay, here's the list of, accounts that I'm going to work as a seller. And I can then, figure out what their personality types are. And then I can customize my approach based on that. So there is ways to do this at scale. It doesn't always have to be one-to-one, but it does require some upfront work that most people aren't doing today.
For sure. So how would one go about doing that? Like figuring out, I'm going after this company, these are my buyers, these are the personality types. That first research step. Yeah, how would a seller go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm with Humantic, and this is exactly what we do. We give sales teams insights into their buyers, specifically around their personality. So if any and this is not, a new concept. This model's been built over 8 years. The founder, Emerpreet, built it previously with another startup that he did and just has pivoted now to B2B. And there's one other, I'm obviously biased, because I work with Humantic. There's one other company that does something similar. But we actually get really granular because we're looking at not just the disc profile, but we're also looking at the ocean, or considered the big five. And so we're looking at these buyers' entire digital footprint, and then giving you an analysis based on that, of what their personality traits are, what their communication styles are. And this is not a new concept, just a new technology, because, disc selling has been around for a very long time, and it can be very effective when done right. Good sellers understand human psychology, to a certain extent. The problem is the majority of sellers just don't spend enough time really understanding that stuff and how to read people to adjust and adapt to the way that's going to be most effective with each buyer.
Yeah, I've noticed that too with good sellers, where almost intuitively they can mirror and adapt and, relate with anyone. Doing that in a cold email or a cold call, though, I don't know how that's really possible. So I love the fact that you guys are pulling all that information and arming sellers with it. I think to make it more concrete for our listeners too, would you mind giving a couple examples of, maybe different personality types and some of the differences in how you would do the outreach?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll give you, here's a great example. We just ran an experiment where we wanted to test this with cold calling, right? Because kind of the default in a lot of times when people talking about personalization goes to email. It's like, well, we can also personalize cold calls, right? If you've done your research on the list that you're calling, in advance, you can sort of personalize that. Most people aren't doing that though. They're just kind of winging it. They're throwing a list in a dialer, they're calling, and they're, hoping some magic can happen. So what we did is we were targeting sales leaders, because sales leaders are typically, who we engage with. And we ran their personality analysis prior to doing that cold call block, which was just an hour cold call block. And we put them into 4 different buckets. And in those 4 different buckets, D type, I type, S type, and C type. Surprisingly, D stands for dominance, right? So surprisingly, a majority of the list, about 70% of the list was D types. So what we did is we didn't change a ton in the script as far as like intro and, getting into a conversation. But what we did change is we changed what happened when we got into conversations. So some of that is tone and speed and knowing that they're, what they care about. Do they like small talk? Do they not? Do they want to know that we have worked with somebody similar to them before? So they're more story-driven people. Are they more influence type people, right? Or are they more analytical, where they want to know, hey, we've been able to help teams increase their, positive reply rates by X, something like that. So once we got into conversations, we could have sort of adapt because we have some do's and don'ts. We know what their priorities are, what they care about most. And so that's a good example. Email is another great example as well, where, sometimes some of it is even just like whether you say hi or hey or nothing. Another great example that I love using is bullet points. And for whatever reason, bullet points is one of those things that some people love them and some people just hate them, And so if they hate bullet points, not a good chance that they're going to reply to that email because they're just not going to process the information in the way that you want them to motivate them to take some action. But another great use case is not even in your just cold outreach. Imagine that you're in a deal, right? And you've done a great discovery. Like you've just, feeling good, drop mic, discovery, high-fiving with the sales team. And you're like, I feel good about this one. They have a clear problem that I was able to quantify. There's a huge impact if they don't solve it. Like I'm ready to go spend my commission check. I feel so good about it, right? Every seller's been there before. Well, then you send them that information and you send them the information the way that you would like to receive information. And maybe that in this example is bullet points, right? And that person receiving that information just hates bullet points. They may not even know that they hate bullet points, but every time they get an email with bullet points, it sits in their inbox for a week or 2 weeks. That's enough to definitely stall your deal. And in some cases, even kill your deal.
That's super interesting because, best practices are just one size fits all, keep the email brief. Let's say use bullet points. Like there are these set best practices. So stepping outside of that, intuitively makes sense. You have to tailor it, but that's an interesting one. I'm in the camp of pro bullet points. Give me that all day instead of a long multi-paragraph email, but I get there's different types. So I'm curious then, because some of it comes down to adaptability. Some of it probably comes down to natural compatibility, like between personality types and styles. So let's say you have a large sales team, you're figuring out what to do. Is it teaching people to adapt or pairing the right sellers with the right buyers and accounts?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I was actually hoping that you were going to go down this road, Dustin. And that's a question for the sales org, right? Because, there is a little bit of a challenge with the enablement piece here, right? Because, but some of it is easier to adopt. And then once you see, as a seller, once you see this stuff actually work, like you change an email based on, what it is that you learn about that personality type. You see, your positive reply rates go up and you're booking more meetings, and then you get into deals and you see that, your win rates increase and things like that. Then you become a real believer of this stuff, right? So it makes, more sense for you to really put an effort to try to really understand this stuff about your buyers. But there is a world where teams can actually route accounts based on compatibility, because then the enablement piece doesn't have as big of a lift, right? You can actually have reps, and every rep will admit this. If you think about it, there's some prospects you mesh with, and there's some that you just don't. And like you mentioned, Dustin, that's a compatibility issue. And so you can then say, hey, this is the personality type that Dustin is going to have the most win rate with. But then we can even look more macro level too, depending on what it is that you do as a company, there's going to be certain personality types that are more likely to be early adopters of what it is that you do. And that's where things can get really interesting. And I think that you'll appreciate this is because we can actually score the leads based on personality. We know as a business at Humantic that if any buyer has any variation of D in their personality type, we have almost a 400% more chance of closing that business because they tend to be early adopters in what it is that we do as a company. And that's true for every company. It might not necessarily be the same type as us, but if you do a simple win-loss analysis and you analyze that data, then you can actually start to prioritize and score leads based on the people that are coming in. We all, everybody loves inbound, right? But the problem with inbound is some of it's qualified, some of it's not. And what if you can prioritize based on who you know is most likely to actually buy from you?
Yeah, the thing I like there is it's niching down on some stuff we've already kind of been doing that is more general, right? So, I look at what titles are more likely to buy from what type of company. And there's probably a correlation that most of them are X personality type. But what about the other 40%, right? Like, what
Yeah.
about that 40% that are? So I like that you're, filling that gap there. The rep personality type is an interesting one I kind of want to dive into. Like, internally here, I have a few reps that are complete opposite personality types, both excellent win rates, pretty much equal. It nets out. But now I'm thinking if I could guide them to the right account, maybe I could boost it across the board. So for reps who maybe have trouble adapting, they just have a strong personality type, they can't get the analytical brain off or they can't relax. How would you coach them to be more adaptable and make those changes?
I mean, simple hack is to think about somebody that you know.
Mhm.
And so a good exercise is family, friends, see what their personality types are, right? And then when you come across one of those types, as a buyer or prospect rather, think about that person, right? And think
Mhm.
about how you know these people fairly well. You got to know these people fairly well in order for this to really work. So, if you're having a hard time adapting to a particular type of personality, you know, try to find somebody that you know pretty well personally that has that type. And you can kind of think about that person when you're engaging with your prospect that has that same personal type as this family or friend of yours. And that can help you really kind of think about, because as a friend, friend or family, what they kind of care about most, what kind of makes them tick. You understand some of those things at at least a decent level. And that's an easy way to kind of adapt your approach, based on that person's personality if you're having a hard time sort of adapting.
Nice. No, that's a really good tip. And I think, yeah, there's a lot of ways to take this one. Mine's kind of going with different thoughts. So to give it a
Yeah.
background, like I manage the sales and the marketing team here. So I'm also thinking of the marketing applications as well. Of
Yeah.
you can get very niche and very creepy with who you target with ads. It's just the reality of how things are now. So I'm curious if you have customers who have tested this or tried it, where instead of building a list of target accounts to run LinkedIn ads to, for example, they run a list of personality types at their target accounts, target the ads. Yeah, I'm just curious how that would work.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up, and it's because it's something that we're actually testing internally
Mhm.
ourselves right now, because I think it's something that people have been sort of curious and asking about. Some of the more of the marketing applications of how to use this, and so it's actually something that we recently started testing ourselves. I don't have any like data or results because it's something we just recently started doing, but I think absolutely. I mean, the better that you can get with your targeting, whether it's from a marketing lens or a sales lens, it's going to, increase the efficiency of which both have the same goal, drive more revenue.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm definitely going to be bugging you in about 2, 3 months, asking how that test is going and getting
Yeah.
some thoughts there for sure. And then I think one of the last things I want to ask, just to tie it to, the current economic reality and how things are, and there's a lot of talk on the sales side about, you know, budgets being paused, people being more cautious, scrutinizing spend. I'm curious how, personality AI and some of this targeting and messaging could tie into that, and anything you found there that's really helped.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of, there's a lot of things going on, and we're all seeing all these layoffs and budgets and things
Yeah.
like that. But ultimately, if you look at, at a high level, what the current conditions are, is teams are tasked with doing more with less.
Yeah.
And so what does that mean? We need to be really efficient in a lot of ways, with marketing, with sales. So, targeting needs to get better. Every deal matters more. I think even just a lot of sellers, especially with like all of the layoffs and things like that, people are feeling like I need some sort of edge to perform at my best
Mhm.
because if I don't, then, what happens in the next round of layoffs? So I think, more important, this is something that can really, give people that edge to help them increase, whatever KPI matters most to them.
Yeah, and I think maybe it's just my inbox and I'm speaking bias to it, but it seems like the response from a lot of sellers and marketers is just ramp up the volume. So I feel like
Yeah.
if anything, people are getting bombarded so hard right now that just being able to cut through that noise, it's always important, but I feel more so now than ever. Like I just feel like I'm getting hit with so many messages at the moment. Um, so yeah, definitely a good solution there to kind of get around that.
Yeah. And so if everybody's, zigging, then you zag,
Yeah, 100%.
right?
Yeah.
Because you and I both know ramping up the volume is not the right solution.
Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly. Cool. Well, Colin, thanks for joining me. I learned a lot about, the personality side. I did my undergrad in psychology, so I was nerding out a little bit over that, thinking back, I won't say how many years, but a while back, but super interesting talking about that. If our listeners, want to learn more about you, connect with you, or learn more about Humantic, where should they go?
Yeah, pretty easy. I'm easy to find. I'm on every social platform that there is. Collin Mitchell. It's Collin with two L's. And if they want to, test out Humantic themselves, we offer a free trial. They can just go to humantic.ai, go ahead and give it a spin. And then, if they have any questions or if there's anything that me or my team can do to help, go through some of the business applications. Sometimes people, get these insights and they kind of feel like, oh, I have a Ferrari now, but I don't know how to drive a stick. And so we're
Yeah.
definitely here to help.
Awesome, Colin. Appreciate that. I'll include the links in the description for our listeners, but thanks again for joining me.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of B2B Revenue Leaders. My key takeaway is that AI has just come a really long way in the past couple years. After this episode, Colin actually pulled up my Humantic profile while we were off air and showed it to me, and it was shockingly accurate. A little bit creepy that AI knew that much about me, but honestly, it would give a seller an edge to know that about my personality and have a bit of an insight into how to interact with me, how I like being sold to. So definitely interesting. I learned a lot personally in this episode. If you enjoyed it, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn and connect. Always happy to do that. Or if you're so inclined, go leave us a quick review so that more people can hear our content. Thanks again.